Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a great week, and I hope you're excited for this week's episode. I'm Dakota, your host of the Runaway Sports Podcast, and this week we have a couple of very interesting topics to cover. We'll be covering Purdue's game against the Northwestern Wildcats, as well as the recent news that Minnesota Golden Gophers receiver Rashad Bateman has decided to forego the 2020 season in order to prepare for the 2021 NFL Draft. And so I think there's some interesting conversation to be had surrounding that. But first, we're going to be checking out quickly Purdue's game against Northwestern, currently slated to take place on Halloween. As we know, we are still currently waiting on the Big Ten to release an updated football schedule. We know it will be changing to some degree. The exact details are still yet to come out. There were reports that the new schedule was supposed to come out August 4th, but that seems to have come and gone, and nothing seems to have come of that. So we are still waiting on an updated football schedule. So as I always say, we will move on as if everything is staying as is, and until something officially happens, we will continue to march on. So Northwestern, last season, Purdue finally got the Northwestern problem off its back. Before 2019, Purdue had lost Northwestern 5 straight years, and it took a couple of big games and big moments over the last couple to decide each of these games. I remember in 2017, Jeff Brom's first year, 2018, we opened the season with Northwestern, and it ended very frustratingly. I think I can safely say that was the penalty, the personal foul injury or penalty at the end of the game to give Northwestern a first down where they were able to run out the clock. It was a frustrating way to lose for sure, but we move on. And then last season, obviously, with our fourth string quarterback Aiden O'Connell coming in to lead the way, a bit of a slow start before Purdue finally got off their snide and was able to put some offense together and actually ended up coming away with a 24-22 win in Evanston for Purdue's first win in 5 seasons. So they're looking to build on this performance. They welcome the Wildcats back to Ross-Ade this season, and I think it could be another very interesting game because it always feels as though the Northwestern game is very interesting indeed. Hopefully, Purdue learned from last season and are able to take advantage this season. Looking a little closer at Northwestern individually, they've been such a hot and cold team over the last few years. In 2018, they finished 9-5 with a surprise Big Ten West title, and then a win in the Holiday Bowl. But then last season, it was almost the opposite. They finished 3-9, 1-8 in the Big Ten. And I'm sure it was a very disappointing season for the fans overall. So the offense was mostly listless and really struggled to score outside of a handful of games. They scored 22 against Purdue. They are really bolstered by games against UMass and Illinois, where against UMass they scored 45. And Illinois, they managed to rack up 29. And then Minnesota, they put together 22 as well. Other than those games, they were held to 10 points or less 5 times in their first 8 games. And it was a struggle sometimes watching them try and play offense. But I digress. They are going to be presumably better, and we'll get there when we get to their offense here in a moment. Taking a look at their current schedule, and I'm not going to go too much in depth here because, like I mentioned at the top, this schedule is going to change. The highlights are games they lose. They lose games against Tulane and Central Michigan and Morgan State. I'm sure not the most murderer's row of games, but those are 3 presumably wins that no longer will take place this year. So for a Northwestern team that struggled to score points a year ago, losing those 3 easier games might be a bigger blow than we think. In terms of crossovers, currently they're scheduled to get Penn State, Maryland, and Michigan State, along with their Big Ten West slate. I think this is, almost one of the best case scenarios. I think if you can avoid, if you only pull one of the top 3 in the East, I think you're doing all right. So they pull Penn State, but then they also get games against Maryland, who is still trying to figure themselves out, and Michigan State, who is currently attempting to start over with a new head coach. So it will be interesting. I think their toughest games this season could be trips to Michigan State, Penn State, and Iowa, as well as their home game against Wisconsin. And if head coach Pat Fitzgerald, can't get the season turned around again, I think it could be another very interesting and tough one for Northwestern fans. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the different sides of the ball. We'll start with the offense. As I mentioned, they had a very interesting year on the offensive side of the ball, to put it nicely. Before the Purdue game last season, they averaged 9.75 points per game, which is definitely not going to get it done. And that actually went down, I think, as they entered conference play. I think it got down to somewhere between 6 and 7 points per game. They did manage to raise their average up to 16.3 points per game over the last handful of games of the season, the Purdue game being included there. So in terms of rankings, I always find these kind of interesting. In terms of total offense, they finished 124th out of 130 FBS teams and 126th in passing offense. The running offense was fine. I think they were somewhere in the mid 44th, I think is what I saw. It's, Northwestern is primarily a run-first team, I would imagine. And kind of just from what I've seen over the past couple of seasons, I do try and mix in some balance, but when you're 126th in the country in passing offense, you're going to lean on the run a little bit more. So what do you need to fix the passing attack? You need a quarterback. And quarterback was a sore subject for Northwestern last season, as it appeared to really be locked up almost immediately a handful of years ago when they got the commitment from the former Clemson quarterback, Hunter Johnson. That seemed to be the guy. He was a 5-star guy coming out of Clemson, coming back home to deal with some family stuff. And a lot of people in the Midwest wanted him. I think even Purdue wanted him for a little bit before he decided to play at Northwestern. And that seemed to be that. It seemed Northwestern had their quarterback for the next seasons, and that was that. But after last season, that may not necessarily be the case. The quarterback position was one of the biggest issues and question marks that they had on their entire roster. And they had to deal with a lot of mixing and matching, trying to find someone who was going to find some success. And I think it's going to be a little bit more of that this season. They do get bolstered a bit with the incoming of grad transfer quarterback Peyton Ramsey from Indiana, who decided to stay in conference and play for the Wildcats. So I think he'll provide a solid foundation. I still imagine that they want Hunter Johnson to be the guy, but at the same time, bringing in some experienced talent like Peyton Ramsey definitely would not hurt in the short term. In terms of handing the ball off, the running back position, there's a good pair of options. This season, they have Isaiah Bowser and Drake Anderson. They figure to be the top returners, I believe, and I should look this up, but I believe Isaiah Bowser was injured last season. So I think, looks like he was injured last season and wasn't able to finish out the year. I think he was the guy before he was injured, or at least it was more of a two-man game before then. And so when you lose a guy like a running back like that, and you're struggling at quarterback, it can really show. So in 2019, Bowser did finish with 204 yards and a touchdown, and then Anderson on the other side, which I believe took over for Bowser, finished with 634 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, those two combined are, at 804 or 5 touchdowns of production. They got the offense to 180 yards rushing per game, which is, that's a lot better than Purdue was able to do. I'll just say that. And like I mentioned, 44th in the country. It was the strength of the offense a year ago. And unless they can figure out the quarterback or receiver position, I think it's going to be a strength again this year. And then speaking of receivers, let's go ahead and mention a couple of guys. Last season, as we've mentioned many times, they really struggled on offense last season. And it's going to take a good effort from some of the returning guys, as well as a group effort to kind of help pull them back up into a more respectable receiving offense. Their top returner, Riley Lees, returns after finishing with 51 receptions for 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he kind of racked up the receptions, but kind of lacked in the yards. And I think that could be, that's easily explained just with a quarterback who's struggling, and you have to kind of find a guy. And when you get deep enough into the bench, apparently, unless you're Purdue, who likes to throw the ball a lot, it can really kind of show everywhere else. As a group, this is kind of where it rears its ugly head. As a group, Northwestern's receivers only caught 6 touchdowns all season. And so with Lee's accounting for a third of those, they're definitely going to need some immediate help. And they will presumably get that in a grad transfer from Florida Atlantic, John Rain, who caught 6 touchdowns all on his own a year ago. So I think he'll be able to provide some instant help to the receivers, and hopefully the quarterback, presumably either Hunter Johnson or Peyton Ramsey, should have a couple of guys who can get in there and help out immediately. In terms of their offensive line, they do return most of their offensive line, which should help provide some stability to build around and build on from last season. But at the same time, you're going to need a guy to throw the ball. You're going to need guys to catch the ball, and you're going to need a guy to be able to run the ball as well. And so having the offensive line is a great foundation, but a great offensive line can only take you so far. You need guys with talent and skill to go alongside with those guys who line up across the front. So looking at the Purdue game specifically, when the Purdue defense is on the field taking on this Northwestern offense, I think it's going to, once again, as is mostly in the Big Ten, going to take some effort to stop the run. If the passing offense struggles as it did last year, I think stopping the run is going to be equally as important. Force the Northwestern quarterback to pass the ball, and if you can force them to pass the ball, I think I like Purdue's chances, especially with the change to their new 3-4. If you can stop the run consistently and force them to throw the ball, I think it's going to be a good day for Purdue. I like Purdue's cornerbacks and secondary versus the Northwestern receivers. It seems as though we've struggled in the past with certain passing situations, but for the most part, I think our secondary has the skill set necessary to hold a team like Northwestern to pretty meek production. So be on the lookout for that, to stop the run, and for Purdue's cornerbacks to take advantage of a presumably struggling passing attack. Before we hit on the Northwestern defense, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to cover the defense as well as my game outlook when I come back in a second. And welcome back. We'll now be moving on to look at Northwestern's defense from a year ago, as well as what to expect briefly for this coming season. While they did have a rough go on offense last season, the defense was actually a decent unit. They gave up 23.6 points per game, which was more than enough to give them a chance to win games. But when the offense struggles as they did, it can really be tough sometimes. So go ahead and jumping into a couple of position groups. At linebacker, Northwestern returns a lot of experience at linebacker that really should help them out in 2020. They returned Patty Fisher, a two-time all Big Ten linebacker who finished with 89 tackles and an interception in 2019. Other guys to look out for are Blake Gallagher and Chris Bergen, another pair of guys who should help solidify the interior of the defense. Linebacker play is extremely important in the Big Ten, and Northwestern will have some pretty good and pretty experienced linebackers for 2020. And so when you're trying to, hold the line, as it says, when in terms of defensive production and defensive success, I think having an experienced group of linebackers like this is important, and Northwestern definitely seems to have it. Moving on to the secondary, they also return a lot of experience in the secondary. Travel Willick and J.R. Pace return at safety, and they should be able to build around these two guys going forward in 2020. Greg Newsom II also returns at cornerback and figures the way to lead the way out on the outside after battling with some injuries last season. So hopefully he was able to recover from those and is able to take up his spot on the outside at cornerback to provide some experience and depth at cornerback. I think this is a position group at cornerback and safety that really struggled at times last season. And thinking back to the Purdue game in the second half, Purdue was kind of almost able to get anything they wanted on offense. And how much of that is a product of the skill of the secondary versus the offense kind of struggling and forcing the defense to be out there more than the defense would want to be out there. And so it's kind of a tough one to look at. I know, at least from experience back in Purdue, especially during the Hazel eras, that even with a decent group of defensive players, if the offense is struggling that badly, it's going to break down eventually. I think the 2017 team is also a great example of this, where Jeff Brom was still trying to work out the kinks of the offense, and the defense was doing more than enough to win Purdue games, but the offense was not clicking quite to the level that was necessary. And so that really showed in the end, with the defense having to be out on the field more, kind of wearing down as the game went on, and then kind of making games a little closer than they would like. So back to Northwestern. Along the defensive line, they do take a big hit in past production with the loss of one of the best defensive line players in Northwestern history, and Joe Graziano. He was a beast for them. I believe he was the all-time sack leader or all-time tackle leader. He holds some record in Northwestern football. I believe it was in sacks. So they do lose him, which will be a massive blow to the defensive line. He has been a staple of their defense for a long time, and so moving on without him is going to take some time and some work. Ernest Brown IV is a name to keep an eye on. He only played in 6 games last season, but still recorded a handful of sacks. And so he'll definitely be looking to kind of step up after the loss of Graziano. And he'll be looking to hopefully play a little more as well after only playing in 6 games a year ago. On the 2 ends, they do have some continuity there with Sam Miller returning as a 3-year starter at defensive end. So they do return some pieces who have some experience, but when you lose an all Big Ten guy like Graziano, it can always be a little tougher than it looks on paper. So it'll be interesting to see how the new unit gels and what they're able to accomplish in 2020. So kind of wrapping up the defense, As I mentioned, the defense was definitely the stronger side of the ball for Northwestern until the offense can prove otherwise. That'll probably still be the case in 2020. Northwestern does return a solid group of players in every position group, and that should pay dividends in the long run. But that said, if the offense does struggle again, there's only so much the defense can do. If the defense has to be out there trying to make up for the offense, that's going to hurt you in the long run. And I think it, as I mentioned, it showed in Purdue 2017, and it shows in a lot of programs where the defense is much stronger than the offense. And it could be an issue down the road, especially playing a Big Ten only slate, where each and every week now you're going to be playing another Big Ten program who is, on the rise, to say the least, definitely. Looking at the Purdue matchup specifically, it really doesn't feel too different than the game in Evanston last season. Obviously, the biggest difference is hopefully a healthy starting quarterback and a healthy Rondale Moore. But in the end, I don't see too much difference playing out in this one. I think it helps that it is in Ross-Ade, and I believe that it will help having, obviously, a healthy offense and defense for Purdue. You could point at the experience returning for Northwestern and say that they gain a leg up there. But, with the amount of players and experience that young Purdue players got last season, I think that adds a lot of depth on both sides of the ball. And it could be a very similar situation. I believe that the Purdue offense definitely has much more talent than the Northwestern defense has. Like I said, we saw this in the game last season with that, even with their fourth string walk-on quarterback, Purdue had enough weapons on offense and was able to make enough plays to get the win and leave Evanston with a win. So with a healthy offense and a more experienced offense, I believe that Purdue definitely has the leg up on Northwestern's defense. We'll quickly touch on Northwestern special teams. Charlie Colbander, I apologize, returns for his fourth season at kicker after going 10 of 14 with a long of 44 on the season last year. He had a really successful season, except for a handful of missed kicks, one of which was very costly, as in the Purdue game. He missed one of his 4 missed field goals, ended up setting up J.D. Dellinger for his game winner at the end of regulation. So that is going to be weighing on his mind, I'm sure, and it'll be a sore spot, absolutely. Northwestern gets a new punter in the form of grad transfer Derek Adams from Kent State. I know in the Big Ten, punting is very exciting, and so grad transfer punters are always of note and should always be excited about. In the returning duties, it seems like Riley Lees will probably handle most of them as he did last year. He didn't have many moments, but special teams is always an exciting play and is something to be fundamentally sound on. And this one will be no different for sure. And I've kind of mentioned it here and there, but in terms of my game outlook, I think this game being in Ross-Ade as of right now makes me feel better. Northwestern has a weird ability to bounce back and forth between having good seasons and having bad seasons. So they struggled last year after winning the Big Ten West a year before that. And so what will they be able to do this year? Who really knows? In terms of skill on paper, I think that Purdue definitely has a more skilled offense than the Northwestern defense, as I mentioned. And in terms of defense, I think Purdue has the capability of slowing down the Northwestern offense enough to get the win. With Northwestern's offense adding Peyton Ramsey to the quarterback room, that I think it does raise the floor of the quarterback play for the Wildcats. But with that being said, this was a Northwestern team that really struggled on offense last season, really struggled. They put up 45 on UMass, but it's still just UMass, and it outside of their last 4 games, or the last three or four games, and that game against UMass, they really struggled to score points, and getting to the point where their season average was actually still less than 10 points, even factoring in the UMass game. And so it was a struggle to get guys going. So Payne Ramsey does raise their floor, but it's still a relatively low floor until they prove that they can handle it and they can take a step forward. So I think that Purdue definitely has the talent advantage, and if Purdue doesn't make too many mistakes, I think Purdue is going to perform well in this one, and I think it's going to be a very interesting game. I think it's going to be a very interesting game to watch, because it'll be a very interesting game to keep tabs on up until it happens, because as I did mention, Northwestern does have that weird ability to bounce between 10-win seasons to 3-win seasons, and we just saw a shift back to struggling. So will they be able to bounce back again? I think that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on leading up to it. As always with these, I will not go into my official score prediction here. You'll have to head over to boilerinTexas.com and check out my official score prediction in the written version of this Northwestern preview. I think it's pretty easy to tell who I'm taking to win based on my comments, but go and read my official score prediction, as well as leave your comments there about how you think Purdue will fare in the visit from the Northwestern Wildcats. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about an interesting thing that we could start seeing more of, and that college players are going to opt to sit out the 2020 football season to prepare for the 2021 NFL draft. Give me a minute, take a break, and we'll get into that in a minute. And welcome back once again. As I mentioned before the break, we're going to be going into the idea around and decision of a couple of prominent college football players opting to sit out the 2020 season and prepare themselves for the 2021 NFL draft. With the whole pandemic happening, I think this is something not many people thought of as a possibility, but at the same time, I think it's something that is definitely a definite possibility now that we've seen a couple of higher profile guys make this decision. This conversation is prompted by the announcement of tying it back to the Big Ten of the Minnesota Golden Gophers top receiver Rashad Bateman deciding to opt out of the upcoming college football season and will begin preparing for the NFL draft that he announced on Twitter on Tuesday, the 4th. This is a big blow to a Minnesota team that had a lot of high expectations going into this season. And when you look at his decision, I think it's something that makes sense for him as well as for his future. He joins Virginia Tech cornerback Caleb Farley, who announced early last week that he would also be leaving school to prepare for whatever comes next for him. So I think this is something that we could potentially see more of as time goes on. And it's unfortunate to say, but there are definitely guys on almost every team that you could look at and say, that's a guy who should probably consider opting out, just because you don't know what's going to happen going forward if you do decide to play. And I think it could be a very interesting college football season if we do have it in the end. That said, this is probably the right decision for Bateman as well as probably for Farley. In terms of Bateman, he's definitely, I think, a solidified first rounder as one of the top receivers in the country. I think he is making the best decision for himself. I'm sure it was not an easy decision. When you have these guys come in and something like this happens, it's hard to look at the guys around you and say that you are going to, you're going to leave and you're going to not play. football from Minnesota anymore to prepare to try and hit the draft next season. And so that has to be tough. It seems as though everyone is being very supportive. I'm not sure what else that you really can be, to be completely honest. But this is a decision that makes sense, and it could be something that starts as we get closer and closer to the still undetermined official start date for fall camps. I know that workouts have begun, and it is something that is ongoing. The Big Ten is still yet to release their official schedule for the 2020 season. There have been some reports that it is being held up due to the issues at Rutgers that they have been seeing with containing the virus, and that is causing some holdups. And I think it makes sense as well. If Rutgers can't get their stuff together, the Big Ten may have to make a very interesting decision. And it seems as though they're making the decision of, are we going to play at all? And I think this could be a very interesting wrinkle of maybe we exclude Rutgers from the 2020 Big Ten season. So I think with the just pure uncertainty surrounding what's going to happen with college football this season, I believe that this probably is going to start happening a lot more, especially at programs like Minnesota, programs at, like at Virginia Tech. I think this is something that could, and I'm going to knock on my desk here, but this could be something that impacts Purdue in the ways of Rondale Moore. Who knows? He's always been a consummate professional, and as much as we want to believe that he wants to, suit up in the old gold and black again, he could very easily make the decision to not play this fall. We hope he does. We hope that the universities find a way to deal with all of the precautionary measures when it comes to COVID-19, but he very well could easily decide to skip his last season in West Lafayette and declare for the 2021 NFL draft early. He has always made it known that his goal is to get to the next level. He is good enough to get there, and he doesn't need to play another season to do it. The only thing that would get in his way is obviously the rule where you have to be 3 years out of high school before you can play in the NFL. And it's a tough topic to cover, but at the same time, could be a potential reality, and I'm sure it's always in the back of every Purdue fan's mind, mainly because it's always in the back of mine, that in a worst case scenario, we may have seen the Purdue play his last game in the old gold and black already, and that is extremely disappointing, and all of you should take as much precaution and every measure you can to help ensure that we have football this fall. No matter your views, no matter your thoughts and opinions, if you want to see college football, things have to change, and I am hoping endlessly that is able to happen. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on that as a potential thing to start seeing from some bigger programs or some bigger names in the college football world. And it is to get the idea out there that this is something that we're probably going to start seeing more of the longer that this uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 continues. And it could be a very interesting thing to keep tabs on. But with that said, I think that is going to wrap up this edition of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. I thank you for joining us. We covered the Northwestern game, as well as a couple of players opting out of the 2020 football season. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving it a rating on whatever platform you use to listen to this. If you're watching on YouTube, please consider giving it a thumbs up and sharing it. That actually goes for both. I hope you all have a great week. Hopefully we'll get some news on the Big Ten schedule release. That was hopefully going to come out this week, but hopefully it's going to come out sooner rather than later, and we can make the necessary adjustments with this preview schedule from there. But with that said, I hope you all have a great week. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue.